Darius Velas stood outside the glass doors of the studio, adjusting the collar of his shirt. It wasn't expensive, just a well-fitted navy button-down he'd bought from a local black-owned boutique back in Atlanta, but it felt right. He took a slow breath, watching his reflection in the glass. Behind him, Los Angeles traffic hummed like distant thunder. In front of him, a security guard gave a nod and waved him through. He'd been invited onto The Morning Pulse, one of those nationally syndicated talk shows that mixed celebrity gossip with hard-hitting interviews. The producer had called it a huge opportunity to spotlight his company, Viridian Flow, a logistics tech startup that used AI to cut waste in supply chains while creating green jobs in underserved neighborhoods. Darius had built it from nothing. Nights spent coding in his cousin's garage, maxed out credit cards, and a stubborn belief that business could be both profitable and humane. The invitation had sounded genuine at first. "We want to highlight innovation," the producer said, "especially from voices that don't always get the mic." Darius had hesitated. He'd seen how these shows sometimes turned serious guests into punchlines, but he also knew visibility could mean real contracts, real change. So he said yes. Now, walking through the studio's bright, sterile hallway, he noticed the vibe shift. Assistants avoided eye contact. A stagehand muttered something into a headset as Darius passed. In the green room, the coffee was fresh, the fruit platter untouched. A monitor played the show live. Host Gregory Lang was laughing with a reality TV star about fake hustle culture. Darius sat down, scrolling through messages from his team back home. His little sister had sent a photo of their mom holding a newspaper clipping about him. "Proud of you," she'd written. He smiled. Then the producer walked in. Sharp suit, too much cologne, clipboard in hand. "Darius. Great to finally meet you in person," she said, shaking his hand a beat too long. "Greg's really looking forward to this. He's been reading up on your work." "That's good to hear," Darius replied, keeping his tone neutral. "We're framing it as a rags to riches meets tech revolution angle," she continued, flipping through notes. "But Greg likes to keep things unspicy. Don't be surprised if he pushes a little. It's just TV." Darius nodded slowly. "As long as it's honest, I'm fine with tough questions." She gave a tight smile. "Oh, it'll be honest." Back in his mind, he replayed his early days. After his older brother, Malik, died at 28 from a misdiagnosed heart condition because the nearest clinic in their neighborhood was understaffed and underfunded, Darius had promised himself he'd build something that mattered. Not just for profit, but for people. Viridian Flow wasn't just software. It rerouted delivery trucks to avoid idling in low-income areas, partnered with community colleges to train drivers in electric vehicle maintenance, and reinvested 10% of profits into local health initiatives. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Now sitting in this overly lit room with fake plants and a mini fridge full of energy drinks, he wondered if any of that would come through on screen. A staffer appeared. 2 minutes. Darius stood, smoothed his shirt again, and followed her down a short corridor. The set was smaller than it looked on TV. Bright lights, a fake bookshelf, 2 plush chairs facing each other like gladiators' stools. Gregory Lang was already seated, chatting with the camera crew, flashing that practiced grin Darius had seen 100 times on late-night reruns. Up close, Lang looked tired around the eyes, but his posture screamed confidence. "Darius!" "Welcome," Lang said, standing to shake his hand. His grip was firm, almost challenging. "Heard you're the real deal." "Just trying to solve real problems," Darius said simply. They sat. The countdown began. Red light on the camera blinked to life. "And we're back," Lang said, turning to the lens with effortless charm. "Today we're talking innovation, ambition, and the changing face of American entrepreneurship. My guest is Darius Velas, founder of Viridian Flow, a company making waves in the tech world." "Darius, thanks for being here." "Thanks for having me," Darius replied, voice steady. The first few minutes went smoothly. Lang asked about the company's mission, the tech behind it, how Darius got started. Darius spoke with quiet passion about efficiency, sustainability, and dignity in work. He mentioned how his team included formerly incarcerated individuals trained in data entry, how they'd reduced emissions by 22% in their pilot cities. Lang nodded along, but his eyes kept flicking to his producer off camera. Then came the shift. "So," Lang said, leaning forward slightly, "your company's gotten a lot of attention and funding lately. Some people are saying it's less about your tech and more about, well, checking boxes. You know what I mean? Darius didn't flinch. I hear what you're asking. But our clients don't care about boxes. They care about results. We've saved Fortune 500 companies millions. That's not diversity points, that's math. Lang chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sure, but let's be real. Would you be sitting here if you weren't a young black entrepreneur in today's climate? I mean, look at you. You fit the narrative perfectly. The studio went quiet. Even the crew seemed to pause. Darius looked directly into the camera, not at Lang, but at the millions watching at home. I'm here because I built something that works, he said calmly. Not because of my skin, but in spite of the barriers that came with it. I didn't get venture capital because I'm black. I got it after 87 rejections, most of them from people who said my market wasn't scalable, or my team lacked pedigree. What they really meant was they didn't see people like me as founders. Lang shifted, clearly unprepared for the directness. That's a strong take. It's a fact, Darius said. And if the narrative you're talking about is that black people can build world-class companies without handouts, then yeah, I fit that narrative. Because it's true. A beat of silence. The audience stirred. Someone clapped. Then another. Then more. Lang forced a smile. Well, we'll be right back after this break. The red light went off. Back in the green room minutes later, Darius's phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from friends, investors, strangers. One read, "You just spoke for all of us." He exhaled, running a hand over his face. He hadn't gone in looking for a fight. He just refused to let someone shrink his truth to fit their script. Outside, the sun was setting over LA. But back in Atlanta, his team was already planning their next move. And for the first time in a long while, Darius felt not just seen, but understood. He didn't know it yet, but America was about to have a lot to say about what happened in those 3 minutes. And none of it would be quiet. The commercial break felt like forever. Darius sat in the green room again, heart still steady but mind racing. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't cursed. He'd just spoken plainly, like he would to a neighbor over a fence. But something about the way he'd looked Lang in the eye, the quiet certainty in his voice, had shifted the air in the studio. A stagehand passed by and gave him a quick thumbs up. One of the makeup artists whispered, "You good, man?" He nodded. "Yeah, just real." Back on set, the crew moved faster now. There was a new energy, nervous, electric. Lang was pacing near his chair, scrolling through his phone, jaw tight. The producer hovered nearby, speaking in hushed tones into her headset. Darius walked back in slowly, hands in his pockets, calm on the outside, bracing inside. The red light blinked on again. "Welcome back," Lang said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He turned to Darius. "So, let's pick up where we left off. You said you faced 87 rejections. That's a lot. But critics argue that companies like yours get fast-tracked now because of DEI initiatives, not because you're actually better than the competition." Darius didn't blink. "Then let them look at the numbers. Our system cuts delivery times by 31%. We've reduced fuel waste by over 18% in cities like Detroit and Houston. Our client retention rate is 94%. If that's fast-tracked, then yeah, I guess excellence moves quickly." A few people in the audience chuckled. Lang's smile thinned. "But here's what I don't get," he pressed, leaning forward like he was sharing a secret with viewers. "You're clearly smart. You've got drive. So why lean so hard into the race thing? Why not just say, I built a great company and leave it at that?" Darius tilted his head slightly, like he was considering the question seriously. "Because it's not that simple. I did build a great company, but I also built it while being followed in stores, while investors asked if I had a technical co-founder, meaning a white one, while news articles called me articulate like it was a surprise. So when you ask me to leave race out of it, you're asking me to erase part of my journey, and I won't do that." The room got quieter. Even the camera operators seemed still. Lang shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not saying you didn't earn it. I'm just saying the playing field isn't as level as people think. Some folks get extra help. And some folks," Darius said gently, "get extra chances their whole lives without ever realizing it. You asked if I'd be here if I weren't black. Fair question. Let me ask you one. Would you still have this show if your dad hadn't owned 3 radio stations and your uncle hadn't been a network exec?" The audience gasped. Someone actually said, "Oh," Lang froze. His face went pale, then flushed red. He opened his mouth, closed it, glanced at the producer, who was now standing with her arms crossed, eyes wide. Lang stammered. That's not relevant, isn't it? Darius said, voice still calm. We're talking about how people get opportunities. I'm just pointing out that privilege isn't always skin deep. Sometimes it's generational. Sometimes it's invisible to the person who has it. He didn't say it with anger. He said it like he was explaining the weather. Clear, factual, impossible to ignore. The host tried to recover. Well, that's a perspective. We'll be right back. The red light went off. This time, chaos erupted. The producer rushed over, not to Darius but to Lang, whispering fiercely. Audience members were already pulling out phones, recording clips, texting friends. One woman stood up and said, "That was powerful," loud enough for everyone to hear. Darius stayed seated. He didn't gloat. He just breathed. He thought about his brother again, how Malik used to say, "Truth don't need a megaphone. It just needs a mouth willing to speak it." Backstage, a young intern handed him a bottle of water. "My cousin applied to your training program last month," she said quietly. "She got in. She's crying right now watching this." Darius nodded. "Tell her to keep going." When they came back from break, Lang tried to pivot to lighter topics, asked about Darius's favorite food, his dog, but it felt hollow. The spark was gone. The audience wasn't buying it. They kept glancing at Darius like he was the only real thing in the room. The segment ended with a stiff handshake and a rushed, "Thanks for coming on." No follow-up. No real closure. Just credits rolling over canned music. But outside the studio, the story was just beginning. Within 20 minutes, a clip of the exchange hit Twitter. Not the full interview, just the part where Darius asked about Lang's family connections. It spread like wildfire. By the time Darius stepped into his Uber, it had 500,000 views. His phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from old college friends, mentors, strangers. One message read, "You said what so many of us have felt but were too scared to say." Another, "My son watched that with me. He's 12, he said, so it's okay to be proud and smart." I cried. Darius leaned his head against the window as the city lights blurred past. He hadn't planned any of this. He hadn't rehearsed a viral moment. He just refused to let someone twist his story into something small. Back at his hotel, he scrolled through the comments, not the hateful ones, but the ones that mattered. A teacher in Chicago said she played the clip in class. A veteran in Memphis wrote that he'd been denied a small business loan 3 times and finally understood why. A young woman in Oakland said she'd almost quit her startup after being told her idea wasn't investor ready. But now she was reapplying. None of them wanted a hero. They just wanted to see someone who looked like them stand firm and not apologize for existing. Meanwhile, news outlets scrambled. Some called Darius brave. Others labeled him confrontational or divisive. A conservative blog ran a headline, "Entrepreneur attacks host in DEI meltdown." But even that piece had to quote his stats because they were undeniable. Lang's team released a statement that night. Gregory values diverse perspectives and appreciates the spirited conversation. It sounded corporate, empty. People noticed. By morning, Yakarn Truth Over TV was trending. Memes showed Darius with captions like, "When you bring receipts to a rumor fight and calm, clear, unbothered." A popular comedian posted a skit. Me trying to return soup at a restaurant versus Darius dismantling systemic bias before breakfast. But Darius didn't post anything. He didn't do interviews. He just called his mom. "You okay, baby?" she asked. "I am," he said. "More than okay. You didn't let them make you small." "No, Ma, I remembered who I am." He hung up and opened his laptop. His team had already drafted a response, but he told them to hold off. "Let people sit with what happened," he said. Truth doesn't need a press release. Instead, he wrote a short note on his company's Instagram, just 3 sentences. "I didn't go on TV to fight. I went to speak. And if my truth made someone uncomfortable, maybe it's time they asked why." Within an hour, it had 200,000 likes. That night, alone in his room, Darius stared at the ceiling. He knew this moment wouldn't last. The news cycle would move on. Lang would probably do another show next week like nothing happened. But something had shifted, not just in the public eye, but in the quiet corners where people dream in silence. And for the first time, Those dreamers had seen someone like them not just survive the spotlight, but own it. No shouting. No theatrics. Just truth delivered like a gift, and America was still trying to catch its breath. Morning after the interview, Darius woke to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Not just texts, calls, voicemails, LinkedIn messages, even a few emails from people who somehow found his personal address. Some were angry. One said, "Go back where you came from." Another threatened to expose him. He deleted those without reading the rest. But most weren't like that. A teacher in Cleveland wrote that her students had watched the clip in class and spent the whole period talking about fairness, opportunity, and what it means to speak up. A veteran in San Antonio shared that he'd been turned down for a small business loan 3 times, and now finally understood why. A young woman in New Orleans said she'd almost quit her tech project after being told her voice wasn't executive material. Now, she was reapplying for grants. Darius read those messages slowly, one by one. He didn't respond to all of them, but he saved every single one. By noon, the story had exploded. News networks played the clip on loop. Some called him courageous. Others labeled him combative or playing the race card. A few conservative outlets twisted his words, cutting out the part where he cited hard data and focusing only on the question about Lang's family. But even they couldn't ignore the facts: Viridian Flow's client list, its patents, its real-world impact. Still, the backlash came. 2 speaking engagements were quietly canceled. A potential investor who'd been very interested last week now said they were reassessing priorities. Darius's social media mentions filled with bots and trolls, some posting fake screenshots, others hurling slurs disguised as opinions. He didn't engage. He muted, blocked, and moved on. What surprised him more was the support. Strangers sent care packages to his office, books on black inventors, homemade cookies, letters from kids who'd drawn pictures of him as a superhero. One envelope contained a single keychain that read, "Truth is your superpower." His team held an emergency call. "Do we put out a statement?" asked his head of communications. Darius thought for a moment. No press release. No interviews. "Not yet. Why not?" someone asked. "Because right now people aren't looking for a corporate response," he said. "They're looking for a human one." So that evening, he filmed a short video on his phone. No lights, no script. Just him sitting on his hotel room bed in a plain gray t-shirt. "I didn't go on that show to start a fight," he began, voice quiet but clear. "I went because I believe in what we're building. And when the host questioned whether my success was real, I couldn't stay silent. Not because I needed to prove anything to him, but because there are kids watching who need to know their dreams aren't less valid just because the world tries to shrink them." He paused, looked directly into the camera. "My company didn't get where it is because of handouts. It got here because we worked harder, thought deeper, and cared more. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, maybe they need to ask themselves why." He posted it. No hashtags. No caption. Just the video. Within 3 hours, it had over 1 million views. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, something else was happening. A junior producer from the Morning Pulse, someone who'd stayed quiet during the taping, reached out anonymously to a journalist. She sent internal emails showing that Lang's team had planned the confrontational angle days in advance. One message read, "Greg wants to push the DEI angle hard, it's trending. Make sure the guest isn't too polished." Another said, "If he gets emotional, keep rolling. That's the clip we need." The journalist verified the documents and published the story the next morning. The internet erupted. Viewers felt betrayed. Advertisers panicked. By lunchtime, 3 major brands pulled their ads from the show. A popular snack company tweeted, "We support honest dialogue, not manufactured conflict." Others followed. Lang tried damage control. He appeared on a rival network, calling the interview a passionate exchange and saying he respects Darius's journey. But his apology sounded rehearsed, hollow. People noticed he never actually said he was wrong. Darius didn't comment on it. He was too busy. Because while the world debated, something real was happening back home. His team had launched a new initiative the week before. Quietly, without fanfare, a mentorship program pairing young founders from overlooked communities with seasoned advisors. After the interview, applications flooded in. Over 248 hours. Many wrote, I saw you on TV. I finally believe I belong in this space. Darius read every application, not just the bios but the handwritten notes at the bottom. One said, "I've been coding in my grandma's basement for 2 years. No one's ever taken me seriously. But you did, so I'm trying again." That night, instead of sleeping, Darius called a meeting with his leadership team. "We're not just a company anymore," he said. "We're a signal, and signals need to be clear." He announced they'd fast-track funding for the top 20 applicants, not loans but grants. No strings, just support. One team member hesitated. "But our Q3 budget will adjust," Darius said. "This is the work." The next day, he finally accepted one interview, not with a news network, but with a youth-run podcast based in Detroit. The host was 17. She asked him how he stayed calm under pressure. "I don't think of it as pressure," he said. "I think of it as responsibility. Every time I speak, I'm speaking for the kid who's been told he's too much or not enough, so I owe it to him to be steady." That same afternoon, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Darius?" A man's voice said, calm, professional, familiar. "Yes, this is Raphael Chen, CEO of Nexora." Darius sat up straighter. Nexora was a global logistics giant, the kind of client most startups only dreamed of. "I've been following your work for months," Raphael said. "But after Tuesday, I needed to call you myself." Darius waited. "I don't want to partner with you because you're black," Raphael continued. "I want to partner with you because your system reduced emissions by 18% in Houston while cutting costs." "That's rare. That's brilliant, and I'd be a fool not to work with you." They talked for 40 minutes about integration, timelines, shared values. No performative allyship. Just business. Real business. After they hung up, Darius walked to the window of his hotel room. The city below was alive with noise and light. But all he could think about was his brother Malik, who never got to see this. "You were right," he whispered. "Building something that matters. It changes more than just numbers." Back online, the conversation kept shifting. Memes gave way to think pieces. Think pieces gave way to policy discussions. A senator referenced the interview during a hearing on small business equity. A university invited Darius to give a commencement speech, not as a diversity speaker, but as a founder who redefined what leadership looks like. And through it all, Darius stayed grounded. He still answered emails from his team at 2 a.m. He still called his mom every Sunday. He still believed that real change wasn't made in viral moments, but in the quiet, consistent choices that follow. The storm hadn't passed, but he wasn't drowning in it. He was learning to sail. The cancellation came on a Tuesday. Darius was in his Atlanta office reviewing blueprints for a new training center in East Point, when his assistant walked in holding a tablet. "You need to see this," she said, voice low. On screen, a news alert flashed. The Morning Pulse canceled after 12 seasons. The article said ratings had plummeted. Advertisers kept pulling out. Internal morale was in shambles. The network cited shifting audience preferences and a desire to refresh daytime programming. But everyone knew the real reason. The leaked emails, the public outrage, the quiet exodus of viewers who'd finally had enough of manufactured outrage dressed up as journalism. It all added up. Lang didn't make a public statement. He just vanished. No farewell show, no Instagram post, just silence. Darius didn't celebrate. He didn't post karma memes or gloat. He simply closed the browser tab and went back to the blueprints. Because while one door closed, dozens were opening. The Nexora deal had gone through, bigger than anyone expected. Not just a pilot program, but a full-scale integration across 3 states. That meant new hires, new training modules, new partnerships with community colleges. Darius insisted that at least 60% of the new tech roles go to people from neighborhoods Viridian already served. "If we're growing," he told his team, "we grow together." But the real shift wasn't in contracts, it was in culture. Founders who'd once stayed quiet now spoke up. At a tech conference in Austin, a young Latina CEO stood on stage and said, "I used to downplay my background to seem more professional. But after watching Darius, I realized my story isn't a weakness, it's my edge." The room gave her a standing ovation. Back home, Darius launched the Viridian Founders Collective, the non-profit arm he'd been quietly planning for months. Funded entirely by company profits, not donations, It offered seed grants, legal support, and mentorship to entrepreneurs from communities often ignored by Silicon Valley. No flashy launch party, just a simple website that went live at midnight. By sunrise, it had 800 applications. One came from a former school custodian in Birmingham who'd built an app to help teachers track classroom supplies. Another from a single mom in Minneapolis who designed solar-powered charging stations for public parks. Darius read each one like it was a letter from a friend. He also started visiting schools again, not as a success story, but as a listener. At a high school in South Atlanta, he sat in the back of a computer lab while students pitched their own mini startups. One kid, no older than 15, had built a chatbot to help seniors navigate Medicare. "It's not perfect," the boy said nervously. "Neither was mine," Darius replied. "But you started. That's the hardest part." Afterward, the principal pulled him aside. "You know, most big shots come here to take photos. You actually stayed." "I remember what it felt like to be invisible," Darius said. "I won't do that to anyone else." Meanwhile, the ripple effects kept spreading. A major venture capital firm announced it was overhauling its pitch process, adding blind reviews for early-stage applications to reduce unconscious bias. A national business magazine ran a cover story titled, "The Quiet Revolution: How Integrity is Becoming the New Disruption." Darius was featured, but so were dozens of others, farmers, coders, designers who'd chosen substance over spectacle. Then came the call from Washington. A congressional aide reached out. Would Darius be willing to testify before a subcommittee on small business access to capital? Not as an activist, not as a symbol, but as a founder who'd navigated the system and found ways to bend it toward fairness. He said yes. The hearing was held in a wood-paneled room filled with suits and stern faces. Darius wore the same navy shirt he'd worn on the talk show, now slightly faded but still clean. He didn't bring notes. He just spoke from the heart. "I didn't start my company to make a statement," he told the panel. "I started it because my brother died waiting for a system that didn't see him as worthy of care. I built Viridian to prove that business can be a force for healing, not just profit." He shared data, how minority-owned firms receive less than 2% of venture funding, how network access often means who your parents know, how risk assessment can hide bias in plain sight, but he also offered solutions like public-private partnerships that fund training before funding startups, or tax incentives for companies that hire from local talent pipelines. One senator, known for tough questioning, leaned forward. "You've had success. Why not just enjoy it? Why keep pushing?" Darius didn't hesitate. "Because my success isn't mine alone. It belongs to every person who believed in me when the data said I shouldn't exist. And if I stop now, I betray them." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, the committee members began nodding. Afterward, reporters swarmed him outside. "Are you running for office?" one shouted. Darius smiled. "I'm running a company, and right now that's political enough." Back in Atlanta that night, he drove past the old garage where it all began. The door was padlocked now, the neighborhood changing fast. But he stopped anyway just for a minute. He thought about how far he'd come, not in fame or followers, but in faith. Faith that truth matters, that dignity is powerful, that you don't need to shout to be heard. His phone buzzed. It was a message from the young founder in Birmingham, the one with the school supply app. She'd just signed her first pilot with a district in Alabama. "You told me to keep going," she wrote. "So I did." Darius typed back, "Now go further." He started the car and headed home. The city lights stretched ahead, bright and endless. But he wasn't looking at the skyline. He was thinking about the next kid in a garage dreaming in silence. And this time, he knew. They wouldn't have to wait long to be seen. 6 months later, Darius stood in a sunlit room on the 12th floor of a downtown Atlanta building, watching a group of teenagers huddle around a laptop, arguing good-naturedly about code. The space used to be a vacant office suite. Now it was the first official hub of the Viridian Founders Collective. Whiteboards covered in sketches, shelves stacked with second-hand laptops, a fridge humming in the corner stocked with juice boxes and peanut butter sandwiches. It smelled like coffee, ambition, and fresh paint. One of the teens spotted him and waved. "Mr. Velis, we fixed the bug." Darius walked over. "Show me." They pulled up a demo of their app, a tool that helps food banks match surplus donations with nearby shelters in real time. It was rough around the edges, but it worked, and it was theirs. "You built this in 3 weeks?" he asked. "2," said a girl with braids and a t-shirt that read, "Debugging my future." "We stayed late every night," he smiled. "Good. Now make it better." That was the thing no one saw coming after the TV interview. The real story wasn't the confrontation. It was what grew from it. The anger faded. The headlines moved on. But the quiet work, the mentoring, the funding, the belief passed hand to hand. That kept going, and America was finally paying attention. A few weeks earlier, Darius had opened his mailbox to find a thick envelope from Time magazine. Inside was a mock-up of their upcoming cover. His face, calm, focused, no dramatic lighting, stared back. The headline read, "The Architect of Quiet Revolution." Not angry, not disruptor, not poster boy, just architect, builder, human. He almost didn't accept the feature. "I don't want this to be about me," he told his team. "But it's not," his operations lead replied. "It's about what you made possible." So he agreed, but only if they included stories from 5 founders in the collective. The final spread showed him alongside a former barber who'd built a mental health app for Black men, a refugee who coded a translation tool for immigrant students, and others whose names hadn't been on TV but whose work was changing lives block by block. That same week, the Department of Defense announced a new logistics contract, not with a giant corporation but with a startup founded by a 24-year-old from Little Rock, one of the first grant recipients from Darius's program. Her company used AI to optimize supply routes for rural medical clinics. The contract was modest, but the message was clear. Excellence doesn't have a zip code. Back in his office, Darius kept a small notebook on his desk. Not for ideas, those went into digital files. This one was for names. Every founder his program supported, he wrote down their name, their project, and one thing they'd taught him. Today, he added, "Jamila, food rescue app, taught me that hunger isn't a logistics problem. It's a listening problem." He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was trying to be a bridge. The media still called sometimes. "Do you regret what you said to Lang?" one reporter asked recently. "No," Darius replied. "I regret that it took a TV show for people to hear what so many of us have been saying for years." Lang, for his part, had resurfaced briefly, hosting a podcast no one listened to, then disappearing again. Darius never mentioned him. He didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than any comeback ever could. What really surprised people was how little Darius changed. He still took the MARTA train when he could, still answered support emails from his company's customers himself, still ate lunch in the office kitchen with interns, asking about their projects like he genuinely cared, which he did. One afternoon, his mom visited the collective. She walked through the space slowly, touching the walls like she was making sure it was real. At one point, she stopped in front of a mural the teens had painted, a tree with roots labeled community, truth, and grit, and branches stretching toward words like future and freedom. She turned to Darius, eyes glistening. "Your brother would be so proud." "I know," he said softly. "I feel him here." That night, alone in his office after everyone had gone home, Darius sat at his desk reviewing new applications. Outside, the city hummed. Rain tapped gently on the windows. He scrolled past bios, business plans, dreams typed in shaky fonts by hands that had never been told they belonged in tech. He paused on one from a young man in Memphis who'd been homeless for a year, but taught himself to code using library computers. His app connected unhoused individuals with real-time shelter availability and job training slots. At the bottom, he'd written, "I don't need pity. I just need a chance to prove I'm more than my circumstances." Darius approved the grant on the spot. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked out at the skyline. No fireworks, no standing ovations, just the steady glow of a city full of people trying to build something better. That was the real shock, the thing that left America quiet. Not because of rage or drama, but because of clarity. They'd expected a spectacle. Instead, they got sincerity. They'd expected a victim. Instead, they got a visionary who refused to perform pain for the camera. They'd expected noise. Instead, they got a man who spoke softly and changed everything anyway. And maybe that was the most revolutionary thing of all, showing the world that you don't have to burn the house down to build a new one. Sometimes you just have to walk in, sit down, and say the truth like it's the most natural thing in the world. Darius closed his laptop. The rain had stopped. Somewhere down the street, a bus rumbled past. Somewhere in a garage or a basement or a public library, another kid was typing their first line of code. Dreaming in silence, he smiled. Then he turned off the light and walked out, ready to meet them where they were.